the Guardian newspaper, read by so few people now, has done two things that are absolutely laughable. Firstly, when Trump won, they announced that they were going to create counselling sessions for their journalists because it was so traumatic. Today, in a fit of pique that Elon Musk's going to be involved, they've quit Toxic X because it's no good for our mental health. What the hell is happening to our country, Brendan? Seriously, man.
I mean, what a bunch of babies. This is such a temper tantrum. I must say I'm enjoying the Guardian's meltdown since Trump won the election. It's great fun. It's really good to watch. But also, you know, the Guardian might be a rubbish newspaper these days, full of wimps who cry and need mental health checkups when Trump wins. But it did used to be a serious newspaper. It did used to be the organ of the liberal chattering classes. It used to take itself quite seriously. To see it become this babyish tantrum throwing outlet, I think, is quite tragic as well as quite funny. But you know, the reason they're leaving X, it's not complicated. It's because X is now much more open and much more free than it was pre-Elon Musk. And there's lots of community notes to get attached to Guardian articles pointing out where they've got things wrong or where they're talking tripe. There's lots of people who are able to push back on their claims and to challenge them. The Guardian cannot believe that the plebs are allowed to talk back to it. And that's really what leaving X is all about.
And isn't it interesting when you use that word plebs? Because honestly, I could listen to you eulogize all day. I find it astonishing, and I've always found it astonishing. I don't have a problem in any way with a different opinion. As I keep saying on this show to my daughter, I have a problem with what I call the bedwetters, who believe that anybody that doesn't share their opinion on whether it's climate change or I don't know, anything, transgender issues, is some sort of Neanderthal, misogynistic, fascist, racist, horrendous human being who doesn't deserve to breathe. And I find it, and I'd love your take on this. I was talking about this on Plank of the Week earlier. Is it, what happened in America was that average men and women who are being, you know, told by people on The View now that they've sold out America, voted about the economy, about the cost of gas and groceries and immigration. I honestly believe, Brendan, that the same thing is going to happen in the United Kingdom if our politicians don't grasp the fact that they represent the majority of people, not some clique of, I call them advantage gobs, nearly said the wrong word. It just annoys me. They don't seem to grasp, rather, the things that matter to people. They're so wrapped up in ideological politics.
Absolutely. And, you know, Trump's victory is actually the least mysterious thing that's happened in Western politics for a long time. Yeah. It turns out that ordinary working class Americans don't like being called garbage and deplorables and fascists and low information idiots and racists and homophobes and transphobes, all things that they have been called by people like Hillary Clinton and Joe Biden and the New York Times and the rest of the media for years and years and years. And then lo and behold, they don't vote for you because they don't like being insulted. They don't like being looked down upon. Trump, at the very least, the one thing Trump does well is try to connect with ordinary people.
And isn't that, and I was going to say this to you, actually, sorry to jump in, I wrote it down. And that was another thing about the election that I found so ironic. I was saying it earlier. She wheeled out, Greg Swenson was telling me from the Republicans overseas that those celebrity endorsements, they were paid for that. She burnt through $1.5 billion. They were paid for those endorsements. And that didn't turn the dial at all. But then you argue that a billionaire who's been accused of the most terrible things and slated forever could, as you say, resonate with the working man and woman across middle America. That is a skill. Whatever people say about Donald Trump, that is a skill, Brendan.
Absolutely. And Donald Trump has built a multiracial working class alliance. The white working classes voted for him. Huge numbers of working class Latinos voted for him. A growing number of African-American men voted for him. He has built something that the left in this country has not been able to build for a long time, which was a genuinely multiracial working class bloc of voters who want politics to be done a bit differently, who are sick of being economically attacked and culturally attacked. fact, who are sick of the war on their bank balances and the war on their way of life. And all they get from the snooty leftists of the old establishment is precisely those two things, this kind of pincer movement that leaves them with less money and with less dignity. Why on earth would they vote for that time and time again? And I think you're right. We're going to see the same thing here, because the Labour Party here is not that different from the Democrats. They treat working class voters with contempt, and look at how they're talking about farmers, for example, and at some point people are going to push back.
I couldn't agree more. There's a couple of other things, if you're all right. But this is the Liz Kendall, the Work and Pension Secretary, who's created a bit of a firestorm today. She said that people who are not working should not be called economically inactive, Brendan O'Neill from Spike, because it dehumanises them. She said that we need to change our tone, and the way to tackle Britain's mounting worklessness crisis is by respecting people. Now, my opinion is quite well known. I'm delighted, happy, and in fact more than happy to pay my taxes to help people like David from Clacton, who told me he had a well-paid job. His wife had a terrible illness during COVID, and he's a 24-hour carer. That is exactly what it is set up for. But I'm afraid, and people don't like it on the left, it has become a career choice. And there are a lot of people on the dole, on benefits, who are not disabled, who are not mentally ill, and I believe should be forced to give something back to a society that's paying for them to not do anything. And if that is community, whatever, I think they should be forced to do that. People go, oh my God, that's horrific. No, it's not. Give them something to hold on to, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And I can't understand why this has become such a controversial argument on the left. You know, everyone remembers what Karl Marx said, from each according to his ability and to each according to his needs. You know, it's not a bad old slogan, whatever one might think of Marx and Marxism. You know, everyone who has the ability to work should work. And a lot of the people who are currently described as incapable of working and who receive things like incapacity benefit, which is such a broad, sweeping term, a lot of those people could work. Some of them probably want to work, but they've been encouraged to see themselves as useless and to be put out to pasture and to be looked after by the state for the rest of their lives. I do think we need a drive to get people to see work as something that gives them a sense of meaning, as well as a wage.
Absolutely, here.
You know, and the people who are most sceptical of the welfare state, or the explosion of the welfare state, like you, I agree, there are people who need welfare, and I'm more happy to pay for that and to contribute to that. But the people who hate the exploding, expanding welfare state most of all are working class people, because they don't understand why they are able to get up at 7 in the morning, go out to work, do a hard graft, earn a wage, and come and look after their family, while also having to pay for other people to do nothing. That is an unfair system, and I think we need to shake it up.
And I think that's the point. We were talking earlier about what might happen. You were just saying, I mean, 5 years ago, you couldn't talk about immigration in this country for fear of being called a racist. I think more and more people are going to say, from working class backgrounds, I've done everything right and I feel like I'm being mistreated. And that doesn't make me far right. I'm not going to take to the streets and be thrown in jail, but I patently do not agree with a country or a system that doesn't seem to care. And listen, I'll get rubbish for this next sentence, I don't care, that doesn't seem to put its own first, Brendan. And I don't know why that is such a bad thing to say, because it's the truth. But it doesn't matter what I say or you say. I think the worm will turn, and I think that the politicians on whatever side of the fence, and God knows I thought how bad the Tories were at the end, they better wise up, because I would like the British people to understand that their voice can be as powerful as the American people's voice. There's another story I wanted to pick up on with you. As a journalist, an award-winning Telegraph journalist is facing a probe after she allegedly stirred up racial hatred in a post on social media a year ago. Allison Pearson, who was on with Julia earlier, claimed the two police officers turned up at a door at just gone 9:30 on Remembrance Sunday to inform her that she was being investigated on a post on X from last year. The officer allegedly then said he wasn't allowed to disclose what the post was or who it was about. At the time, she'd been talking about Hamas's terrible attacks on October the 7th, as well as pro-Palestinian demonstrations happening in London. I thought we lived in a world of free speech. I do fear, you know, you can go to jail for 15 months for daring to have an opinion, but then we're all supposed to pay money. Honestly, Brendan, I don't know where the world... This, to me, is unbelievably bad.
It's a really shocking story, and your older listeners will remember a country called the German Democratic Republic, also known as East Germany, where exactly this kind of thing happened, where the Stasi police force would go around to the houses of journalists and writers and artists and interrogate them for what they say and what they think. We now have a Stasi-like system of speech policing in Britain in 2024. I think the Allison Pearson story should send a chill down the collective spine, because when policemen are knocking on journalists' doors and interrogating them and not telling them who the accuser is and not telling them what they said that was supposedly so offensive, as Alison said, that is Kafkaesque, and
how can you interrogate somebody, or how can you ask questions if you're not given details on what the hell they're talking to you about in the first place?
It's impossible to defend yourself in a situation like that. Wow. You don't know what to say because you don't know what you supposedly said that was so offensive. But, you know, we live under a tyranny of the easily offended. There are so many people out there, you'll know this, Jeremy, they're scouring the internet all day long. There's probably some of them listening to this show right now.
We might well be arrested tomorrow morning for daring to say things. That's the truth. Anybody that works on this station, or a journalist, people at Spike, we could get a knock on the door tomorrow morning for daring to say that actually, you know what, there's a lot of people who thoroughly deserve benefits, but there's a lot of lazy, feckless people out there. Come and knock on my door. Well, it's ludicrous, man. Ludicrous.
Completely ludicrous, and the way in which more and more moral and political opinions have been redefined as hate speech and therefore can be investigated by the police, that's really terrifying.
And it also puts into perspective, I think, Bud, that what I call prioritising things that matter. So when people talk to me about climate change, I acknowledge there's problems. You can see what's happening in Spain right now on the Costa del Sol, but I'm sorry, Keir Starmer, with your 81% acknowledgement in Baku when nobody else turned out. The president said, I love oil and gas. It's a gift from God. I would prefer Keir Starmer to say, yes, I acknowledge that's the situation, but right now I want to keep pensioners warm. I want veterans off the street. I don't want to screw the British farming community where he will destroy lives that way. I want to think, but I get told, you don't understand, says David Miliband. That's far more important. Try telling that to a farmer or a student whose money's going through the roof, charges. They don't get their priorities right, and it does my head in, because it seems to me even that the politics is increasingly based on focus groups and how you feel you should appeal to certain stratas and not with the people who matter. But Trump's the living proof that in the end the people win, don't they?
They do, and I hope they win here as well. And, you know, climate change is a real thing, of course, but the idea of an eco-apocalypse in which billions will die, I'm sorry, but that's nonsense. That's completely made up. There's no science to back that up at all. So we live under a political class that is constantly telling us that the end of the world is just around the corner. So you better not have a plastic straw. You better not go on holiday more than once a year. You better not go to the supermarket too often. They tell us to tighten our belts to stave off an apocalypse that's never going to happen, while not addressing all the real problems people are facing every single day. Their streets are going to crap, you know, their wage packets are going down, prices are going up, there's lots of social tensions, the borders are not being controlled. These are real pressing problems in the here and now, and instead our chattering classes chase after a fantasy apocalypse. They're letting us down all the time.
Final thing, and this just in, so I just want your response to it. You won't see it. Millions of English households will be clobbered by a council tax hike in April. Well, that's a surprise. We weren't going to raise tax. Council tax hike confirmed by Number 10 tonight as the green light is given to raise it by up to 5%. That after a string of budget raids. We include in that the local authorities in London. Last year they put it up 10%, so as much as 15%. Council tax up by 5%. This government seems to want to tax anybody and everybody.
You know, it's another smack in the face. It's another smack in the face to people who can't afford all this money. And I bet you there will be a lot of people walking through their local streets and they will see their dilapidated high streets. They will see litter everywhere. They will see their towns and villages not really being looked after. And they will wonder, why am I giving more and more money to the council? We seem to be paying out more and more money for services that are not very good. And I think that's going to become a real crisis in the future.
I think you have to understand as well that we can sit, I'm talking to people listening and also you obviously, but I think we can sit, and we're very lucky on stations like this. Spike does this. There's a lot of journalists and people who are empowered increasingly to be able to speak the truth. Now, you probably couldn't, not you, couldn't have done something like Talk 4 or 5 years ago, but it is incredible to see the response and the frustration and the anger building in this country. And if we achieve anything, it's to give those people a voice and not have them... I'm still, for me, the most... Not interesting is the wrong word. The moment this year that blew me away more than any was after the riots, and the speed with which those far-right people were dealt with was tremendous. But it was politicised straight away. And however many miles north in Leeds, there was problems with the Muslim community and nothing happened. I remember this nurse rang me, Brendan, and she said, I happen to think that immigration is appalling. I happen to believe the NHS is a disgrace, and I happen to find this government an embarrassment. But if I go and say that now outside, I'm going to be labelled far right. I'm becoming increasingly fearful that I'm just going to have to keep my mouth shut. I'm not sure that's what our society should be like. And I think this government, but politics in general, needs to get its head out of its backside and go, actually, we're voted in or voted out by the people. We need to listen to what the people want. That's what I think.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think more and more people are realizing that the far-right accusation is just the libel used by the elites to defame ordinary people, to demonize ordinary people who have perfectly fair concerns. I do think we're reaching a crescendo soon where people will demand the right to be heard. They will demand that their problems be taken seriously. And if Labour won't do it, then we'll look for someone who will.
Really great to have you on, my friend. Thank you for coming on. Brendan O'Neill,